Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York City Council hearing on the Committee on Contracts. At this time, please silence all electronics and do not approach the dais. I repeat, please do not approach the dais. If you are testifying or have any other questions or concerns, please contact the Sergeant at Arms. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, you may begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to this hearing of the New York City Council's Committee on Contracts. Today is Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. My name is Julie Won and I have the privilege of chairing this committee. I would like to thank the members of the committee and Speaker Adams for coming together. She will be here shortly to hold today's hearing, and I would also like to thank representatives from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, vendors, advocates, and other interested members of the public for joining us to testify today. I'd like to note that we've been joined by Council members Eric Botcher as well as Council member Gail Brewer. When a nonprofit shelter provider has to take out high interest loan to make payroll while waiting for months for the city to process a contract they've already begun performing, we're not dealing with a minor administrative inconvenience. We're looking at a system failure that directly harms New Yorkers who depend on these services and the most vulnerable. The numbers tell a stark story. In fiscal year 2025, more than 78% of all city contracts were registered late, meaning contractors had begun work before the city finalized contracts or began payments. For human service contracts specifically, the situation is even more dire. Roughly 90% of contracts were registered late, with an average delay of over 4 months between when work begins and when contracts are registered. These aren't just statistics. They represent real hardships for vendors and ultimately for vulnerable New Yorkers who rely on these services that these organizations provide, as those who are good-hearted that work at these organizations at lower wages to do these services. The impact is felt throughout our entire nonprofit sector. Vendors are forced to take on expensive loans and lines of credit while they wait for reimbursement for work they've already performed, and consequences are predictable. Reduced service capacity, difficulty making payroll, and in some cases, organizations scaling back critical programs or deciding not to bid on city contracts at all. The 4 bills before the committee today represent different but complementary approaches to fixing these systemic problems. Intro number 1012A, which I'm a proud sponsor, would require the implementation of a comprehensive digital procurement and contract management system to streamline the entire procurement lifecycle. The system builds on the foundation of Passport and creates a true end-to-end procurement system from vendor registration all the way through payment processing with real-time tracking across agencies. And I want to emphasize that we need true integration across all contracting agencies for this to work. The Comptroller's recent report on nonprofit payments had to exclude the Department of Education entirely because DOE uses separate procurement systems with less oversight. We cannot claim to have reformed procurement when our largest contracting agency, spending over $10 billion in contracts annually, operates in a parallel universe. In fact, just last year, the Comptroller revoked DOE's contract self-registration authority due to ongoing federal corruption investigation. This is unacceptable, and Intro 1012A aims to address this problem head-on. We acknowledge that bringing outlier agencies like DOE fully under city's procurement oversight will require changes to state education law, and we will need to work with our state legislative partners to do so. But we cannot continue to tolerate a system where tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer money goes to contracts with certain agencies that are processed with less transparency and accountability than the rest of the city government. Intro number 1298, which I also sponsored, would expand standardized risk-based insurance guidelines to all city contracts, building on the insurance guidelines for food vendors that we established in Local Law 106 of 2024. Right now, insurance requirements vary widely agency to agency, creating unnecessary barriers for the cost of small businesses and nonprofits trying to do business with the city. Intro number 1392, sponsored by Speaker Adrian Adams, who has joined us, aims to improve our timely payment crisis by mandating quarterly advance payments for certain Department of Homeless Services and Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice contracts, and by creating a pilot program for the large contracts over $1 million. Of fiscal year 2024, 80.65% of all contracts were registered late, meaning contractors had begun work before the city finalized contracts or initiated payments. For services contracts specifically, the situation is even worse, with approximately 90% registered retroactively. Rather than forcing vendors to essentially provide interest free loans to the city while we drag our feet on payments, this legislation would ensure predictable cash flow that enables organizations to focus on service delivery instead of financial survival. Finally, intro number 1401, sponsored by Councilmember Salam, would create a voluntary disclosure program for labor and human rights practices in city procurement, encouraging ethical practices and greater transparency in how the city contractors' supply chains operate. These bills expand upon Council's ongoing procurement reforms efforts, including Speaker Adams's comprehensive procurement modernization package and the work of the Mayor and Comptroller's Joint Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time. We've made some progress. MOX has improved Passport. Agencies have streamlined several procurement processes, and there have been real efforts to address late payment backlog. But despite these improvements, our procurement system remains fragmented and inefficient, with delays that harm both agencies trying to deliver services and vendors trying to get paid for the work that they do. These bills represent meaningful steps towards a procurement system that serves vendors and the public. Addressing these challenges isn't about contractor operations, it's about ensuring consistent, high-quality services for New Yorkers who depend on the city to deliver the support that they need. Before we hear from the administration, I would like to thank the committee staff, Senior Counsel Alex Polinoff, Policy Analyst Alex Yablon, Financial Analyst Owen Katowski, Policy Analyst Alex Yablon, Financial Analyst Owen Katowski for their hard work in putting today's hearing together. I also want to thank my staff, Nelly Vera Martinez, my Legislative and Budget Director, as well as Tenzin Damdul, my Legislative Fellow, and my Chief of Staff, Nick Goloda. I'll now turn the floor over to Speaker Adams to say a few words about her introduction, 1392.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman, and thank you for indulging me as I'm bouncing between hearings today. We've got a lot going on in the council today. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you, panel, for joining us today for this hearing. It is so important. Thank you for hearing out this committee, including my own bill, Introduction 1392. I also want to thank our colleagues, our dedicated staff who've worked tirelessly on these critical reforms, and the advocates, the organizations, service providers, and members of the administration whose insights have helped to shape our comprehensive response to this procurement crisis. Right now, nonprofits are struggling to make payroll because of delayed payments. Human service contracts face extraordinary delays, often months and sometimes over a year, between when work begins and when organizations actually get paid. During this time, they're providing shelter to unhoused New Yorkers, delivering meals to homebound elderly, coordinating legal services, organizing mental health supports, and fighting for justice-involved individuals, all while worrying the lights could get shut off. The city effectively forces these organizations to collectively pay millions of dollars on bridge loans because our procurement process isn't working the way it should. Introduction 1392 seeks to help address these payment issues. Instead of having vendors taking out loans to cover the city's delays, we can provide routine, timely payments for the vital services they perform every day, so these organizations can focus their resources on efficient program delivery and sound organizational management rather than financial survival. This isn't alone financial survival. This isn't alone payroll and payments to vendors. The city has budgeted for these services and has committed to these contracts. The question is whether we make vendors pay interest on emergency loans while they wait for us to process paperwork, or whether we provide payment they can depend on and in a timely way. Introduction 1392 ensures that we do the latter. Starting January 1st, 2026, the bill would require the city agencies to provide at least 25% of a contract's annual value each quarter for contracts with the Department of Homeless Services for temporary housing assistance and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. This will ensure consistent cash flow for vendors delivering vital services like shelter and those who are justice involved. For multi-year contracts, these advances continue seamlessly into subsequent years, so organizations can actually plan and invest in their capacity instead of constantly scrambling to cover immediate costs. The bill also launches a pilot program beginning January 1st, 2027. Beginning January 1st, 2027. Advances across a broader range of procurement, with annual reports on agency implementation and compliance. By January 1st, 2030, we'll have a better understanding of the effectiveness of this approach and whether to make it permanent across more of the city's contracts. Introduction 1392 also includes smart safeguards to protect taxpayer dollars. Advances won't apply to portions of contracts funded by the state or federal government if doing so would be incompatible with such funding. Advance payments can be withheld from contractors who fail to submit required invoices for 3 or more consecutive months unless the contracting agency was responsible for the delay. Agencies will also need to establish clear processes to reclaim funds if services are not delivered or if actual costs fall short. Introduction 1392 is about fairness and fiscal responsibility, and it builds on the momentum from the package of bills we announced at this year's State of the City and passed on October 9th. Those recently passed laws provide 50% advance payments at registration for nonprofit services, codify the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, and require agency corrective action plans. Together, these efforts represent a comprehensive push to make our procurement system fairer, more efficient, and more supportive of the critical organizations that comprise our nonprofit community. Our city's nonprofits are on the front lines of our communities. Speeding up these burdensome processes will help ensure that they can focus on delivering life-saving care and not on chasing the dollars they're owed. I look forward from hearing from the members of the administration today and stakeholders about Introduction 1392 and, of course, the other bills under consideration as we continue to prioritize timely payments and strong vendor partnerships. Thank you so much. I turn it back over to Chair One.
Thank you so much. I want to just give a special thank you to Speaker Adrienne Adams, who has been such a supporter of all of our human service providers and has been adamant on getting our nonprofits paid on time. And it'll be a huge legacy that she leaves behind. And I'm so thankful to be serving under her leadership, because this is probably the most legislation we've passed in the most sexiest committee of contracts with her support. You know, she really recognizes. So I'll now turn over to our committee counsel to administer the oath.
Thank you, Chair. Alex Polinoff, Committee Counsel. Will all members of the administration testifying today please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony today, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, Speaker Adams, Deputy Speaker Ayala, Chair Wan, members of the Contracts Committee, and all the other council members who have joined us here today. Thank you so much for convening this important hearing and allowing me to testify. My name is Michael Cedillo, and I am proud to serve as the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services, also known as MONS. I'm joined today by Yesenia Markland, First Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, Robert Fiato, Chief Financial Officer of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Rosine Ferdinand from the Department of Social Services. She's the Executive Deputy Commissioner of Finance, and also Christine Fellini, Department of Homeless Services First Deputy Commissioner. At MONS, our goal is very simple: to help providers focus on delivering vital services, not on navigating unpredictable payment cycles or complex invoicing systems. But we don't do this work alone. Our success also depends on the thousands of dedicated public servants who work tirelessly behind the scenes to move contracts through a complex contracting system. Their efforts are critical to ensuring that providers get paid and services reach the people who need them most. And while our office serves both nonprofits and public servants, we always remember that our ultimate customers are New Yorkers. So every policy, every reform, and every investment must first consider what's best for those who rely on these essential services. At our last hearing, we heard your feedback and the providers who testified loud and clear. You were candid about finding ways to reform payment delays, the contract registration backlog, lack of transparency, and longstanding systemic challenges that make it harder for nonprofits to serve New Yorkers. We're aligned with the City Council and the sector in recognizing these systemic challenges, and we're committed to finding solutions. While this work is far from finished, I'm proud to share some of the progress we've made since we last spoke. In April, before the last hearing, Mayor Adams announced an unprecedented level of advance payments for fiscal year 2026. For many contracts, we doubled the standard 25% advance payments. And while we don't believe exorbitant advances are sound policy, and while these advances don't solve every challenge, we felt compelled to meet the moment and provide meaningful relief for nonprofits. With respect to concerns around the city's contract backlog, 88% of human service contracts for FY26 were submitted to the comptroller by July 1st, the highest rate in 5 years. This was made possible thanks to the success of MOX's timely registration initiative under the leadership of their chief nonprofit officer, Ilke Denizli, and the tireless work of dedicated public servants at contracting agencies. We also needed to reform the discretionary process to meaningfully reduce the contract backlog. For context, a contract is considered retroactive when the start date occurs before the contract is registered by the comptroller. This creates problems because the city can't pay organizations until the contract is registered, which makes it harder for nonprofits to keep services running. Nowhere is the problem of the backlog contracts more pronounced than discretionary contracts, which are inherently retroactive, as city agencies can't start the registration process until after the new fiscal year starts. By then, the nonprofit's work has already begun, but the contract hasn't been registered, leading to a backlog of contracts. Right now, 64% of the city's backlog of human services contracts are discretionary contracts. We received 31 inquiries from council members, and a vast amount of those inquiries were related to the discretionary contract process. We agree, it's a broken process. That's why, in partnership with the City Council and MOX, the administration launched the discretionary grant pilot, a new process designed to streamline the contracting process to make it more equitable for providers. We should treat council-designated contracts as grants, rather than subjecting providers to a burdensome registration process. Under this pilot, nonprofits with small discretionary contracts below $25,000 at select agencies will now be processed as grants, cutting out 13 steps from the traditional contracting process. This fall, within weeks of receiving a grant agreement, discretionary contract providers will receive 100% of their funding. Reform like this thrives on collaboration, and this initiative is a powerful example of what's possible when we work together. So you asked for more visibility in the contracting process, and beginning January 2026, for the first time ever, MONS and agencies are planning for the preliminary mayor's management report to include key metrics related to human service contracting. This is a major step forward in offering greater visibility, accountability, and ongoing tracking across agencies. We remember your comments about accountability, and we're taking it seriously. That's why we've relaunched ContractStat, our internal performance management system that tracks contract cycle times and identifies bottlenecks. We'll be convening with city leadership next month to review the data and align on improvements. In addition, we conduct quarterly provider sentiment surveys with nonprofits to gather insights into their experiences with their contracting agencies. Their feedback is then integrated into ContractStat to help us pinpoint areas for improvement. And culture change is just as important as policy reform, and we know it doesn't happen overnight. That's why in August, we hosted the city's first ever Excellence in Human Service Delivery Awards, a celebration of the nonprofits and public servants who go above and beyond for New Yorkers. Thank you, Councilmember Brewer, for being there. And to continue this celebration, we declared August 19th through 22nd as New York City Nonprofit Week. During Nonprofit Week, city leadership visited providers to observe service delivery in person and present proclamations to show their appreciation. And next week, I'm leading customer service training for city agency employees as part of our capacity building efforts. Thank you to Councilmember Stevens also for her willingness to speak during Nonprofit Essentials, our 10-week training series for nonprofits who are looking to contract with the city. I know she'll be inviting other council members, and anybody is welcome for that session. We've been actively engaging with council members across the boroughs to support nonprofits and strengthen community partnerships. So it's a pleasure seeing Councilmember Stevens and Councilmember Lee to strategize solutions for nonprofit organizations. Councilmember Stevens, we're also excited to work with her in December for a nonprofit roundtable. We also partnered with Councilmember Rita Joseph for 2 roundtables and recently provided one-on-one support to her providers. We're looking forward to another roundtable with her in November. And we've also been in ongoing discussions with Councilmember Brewer, your team, Councilmember Juan, Councilmember Sanchez, and others to address constituent inquiries flagged by your offices. We're very grateful for your partnership and encourage any council member to reach out to us. Thank you for calling this hearing today. We're currently reviewing Introduction 1392 and look forward to further discussion. While it will require significant changes to work effectively, we want to work in partnership with you to get nonprofits paid and make it easier for New Yorkers to access the services they need. At the same time, we believe it's important to have guardrails in place to ensure accountability and sustainability. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions, and I'll now turn it over to Yesenia Markland, First Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services.
Thank you, Executive Director Cedillo. Good afternoon, Speaker Adams, Chair Wan, members of the Committee on Contracts, and other council members. My name is Yesenia Markland, and I serve as the First Deputy Director at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. I am joined by our colleagues from the Department of Homeless Services, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services. Thank you for inviting us today to discuss the bills on today's agenda. At MOX, our top priority remains clear: strengthening the city's role as a reliable, responsive partner, particularly to the nonprofit providers that deliver essential services and uphold the very fabric of our communities. Informed by the Joint Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time, our work has been focused on modernizing procurement, addressing historic pain points, and implementing reforms that deliver meaningful, measurable results. While we regularly update our partners on this progress, I would like to highlight a few key achievements that reflect our commitment. Earlier this year, MOX concluded its spring contract backlog initiative, unlocking over $700 million in retroactive backlogged contracts for nonprofit organizations. In a major step forward, the administration doubled advance payments for most nonprofit contracts in fiscal year 2026, from 25% to 50% of the base contract value, delivering more upfront cash to providers than ever before. The newly launched Payment Task Force, fully operational since July, is driving real-time progress on the city's 30-day payment mandate. The task force applies data analytics to pinpoint bottlenecks, provides direct supports to vendors, and holds regular office hours. In just the past month, over 60 providers received individualized assistance with budget and invoice issues, and we look forward to providing this hands-on support to even more providers in the coming months. Through our timely registration initiative, MOX is reducing delays and improving transparency across the contract lifecycle. This effort has led to a dramatic increase in on-time submissions. 88% of human service contracts for FY26 were submitted to the controllers on time, nearly doubling last year's performance. As Executive Director Cedillo mentioned, in partnership with Council, the administration recently announced the discretionary grant pilot, a groundbreaking initiative to accelerate funding for the city's smallest community-based organizations. Led by MOX and the City Council in collaboration with DYCD, New York City Aging, DVS, SBS, and MONS, the pilot streamlines the traditional discretionary award process, reducing bureaucratic hurdles and delivering payments months faster. Launching this fall, the pilot will allow eligible nonprofits to receive funding by January 2026. Just weeks after awards are finalized, rather than waiting over a year under current processes, this effort fulfills a key recommendation of the Joint Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time and represents a major step toward greater equity and efficiency in city funding. These outcomes demonstrate a shared commitment across city agencies to reform the procurement processes from the inside out. While we are proud of this progress, we remain focused on the road ahead, working in close partnership with agencies, providers, and council to create a more efficient, equitable procurement system. We're happy to share more information with your staff on these ongoing efforts. Intro 1392. As our ongoing reforms make clear, we fully support the underlying goal of Intro 1392, ensuring timely and stable payments to the city's nonprofit partners. However, we have significant operational concerns with the bill in its current form and would need further conversations with the council to ensure its goals are met effectively. We are open to exploring new payment models that support stability for providers. However, such changes must be developed with an understanding of the broader reforms already underway and with sufficient time to engage all stakeholders, especially those directly impacted. The proposed January 2026 start date for quarterly advances is not feasible for DHS and MOCJ. Implementing this shift mid-fiscal year would require new processes, updated systems, fiscal manual changes, and additional resources, while also creating confusion for providers who will already be receiving a second advance payment in January under existing fiscal year 26 policies. It's also important to underscore the scale of change proposed. Transitioning to a quarterly advance model marks a fundamental departure from the city's reimbursement-based payment model. This means that providers must submit invoices to demonstrate how city taxpayer dollars were spent. While the city has used advance payments as a tool to quickly get funds to nonprofit providers to support their cash flow, the city must also be able to substantiate how advance funds were used. The city does this for advance funding through what we call recoupment, which is when agencies withhold a portion of each invoice to be applied toward repaying what had previously been advanced. The city needs providers to submit invoices regularly throughout the fiscal year, both so that they can get paid and so that we can account for what had been advanced, which has important implications for the city's cash flow. For context, in fiscal year 25, the city issued $3.2 billion in advances, of which approximately $796 million has yet to be recouped. Any shift to quarterly advances must consider this financial reality, including how invoices and audits are managed to ensure fiscal accountability. Additionally, the system is currently designed to ensure that advances are being recouped, and there is a limit on how much money can be advanced on a budget without sufficient recoupment. Substantially altering our financial systems to accommodate a new advance model cannot be achieved within the proposed time frame and would require significant investment. That said, we are open to having conversations with Council about establishing a pilot program to develop a thoughtful quarterly advance model, one that is informed by lessons learned, builds on current initiatives, and provides time to align systems, resources, and stakeholder support. Intro 1401 would allow agencies to request voluntary disclosures from bidders regarding their labor and human rights and human rights practices during the responsibility determination stage. We share the Council's intent to advance ethical standards in city contracting. However, we are concerned that the bill will cause confusion and unfair competition among vendors, while adding administrative burden and cost to the procurement process. The scope of disclosure envisioned may require vendors to conduct extensive internal reviews of not only their operations, but those of subcontractors and suppliers, which could disproportionately impact smaller businesses. It's also important to note that mandatory disclosures already exist within Passport, the city's digital procurement platform. Implementing this bill would require additional system development and resources to accommodate and manage the new voluntary disclosures. Intro 1012. With regard to Intro 1012, MOX generally supports the heart of this proposal to codify and strengthen the city's digital procurement infrastructure. We already maintain a centralized digital procurement and contract management system, Passport, which performs many of the functions detailed in the bill. MOX is constantly working to improve the functionality of Passport as a citywide resource for contract and procurement data, and to make Passport more accessible and user-friendly. However, we have concerns with the bill's requirement that the City Chief Procurement Officer procure a third-party quality assurance vendor distinct from any platform developers to provide regular testing of system functionality and performance monitoring. While we understand the desire for oversight, in practice, this would duplicate existing monitoring, introduce inefficiencies, and risk contradictory recommendations. We look forward to continued dialogue to support our joint goal of supporting in the city's procurement system, while harmonizing any legislation with current industry and city practices. Intro 1298. Finally, regarding Intro 1298, we appreciate Council's focus on reducing barriers to doing business with the city while protecting fiscal interests. However, MOX cautions against setting standardized insurance guidelines for broad categories of contracts. The complexity and diversity of city procurements require flexibility, not uniformity. Developing insurance guidelines with eyes towards a one-size-fits-all manner of application ignores the reality that contracts with varying scopes and intricacies demand a more flexible and project-specific approach to insurance requirements. Furthermore, identifying categories of contracts with enough specificity to properly develop insurance requirements in scope with those needs would require the reallocation of agency resources and would likely produce such a wide variety of contract categories that they would undermine the intended clarity. Maintaining these guidelines as dictated by the bill would also impose additional administrative burdens on the city's contracting and procurement processes. We will need to closely engage our partners at the Law Department on this legislation and any efforts to standardize insurance requirements. Once again, we appreciate this opportunity to appear before the Council and share our perspective on these very important issues. We are committed to continued collaboration with Council and all our partners as we work to modernize and improve the city's procurement system for providers and the New Yorkers they serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to acknowledge Councilmember Nurse has also joined us. I'm going to hand it over to Speaker Adrian Adams to ask her questions.
Thank you very much, Chair Juan. In the interest of time, because I'm popping between places today, I just have a couple of questions, then I will yield my time to my very competent chair and this great committee to continue. Thank you all for being here once again. We really appreciate your testimony. How many nonprofits are currently owed money by the city for work that they have already performed?
Thank you, Speaker Adams, for the question. I do not have the specific number in front of me, but we can get you that information by end of day.
Can you get us that information within 24 hours, please, Executive Deputy Director?
Yes, Speaker Adams, we will be sure to get you that information within 24 hours.
Okay, because that was a part of my, I had a two-part question. It was going to be what was the total dollar amount? So let's put that on the laundry list, and then let's put on the laundry list how many of these outstanding invoices are from work performed more than 90 days ago and more than 180 days ago. Okay, thank you. How many nonprofit vendors have utilized the 50% advance payment program that you announced back in April?
Thank you so much for the question, Speaker Adams. So what I see is that 218 providers got the 50% or higher advances in FY26.
Okay, and what's been the uptake rate, and what is the total dollar value of advances provided to date?
Thank you for the question, Speaker Adams. For this fiscal year, with the new policy that we directed agencies for the 50% for many agencies, 30% for MOCJ and DHS providers, we've dispersed over $3 billion in advances this fiscal year.
Okay, and what outreach have you done to promote that?
Thank you, Speaker Adams. Do you mean outreach to the provider community?
Yes.
Great question. So we've done a lot to make sure that that is known for our providers. So at the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services, and I'm sure my colleagues at MOX will speak more to this too, we host a monthly umbrella group briefing. Actually, this was from feedback from your staff who had said that umbrella groups hadn't heard from us as much. So we do a monthly meeting with them. We brief them on all things related to procurement and nonprofit contracting. And so we've made them, kept them aware on a monthly basis as to our new advance directive. In addition, we did a media blitz both right at the start of this fiscal year. It was on Pix 11, making sure folks knew about that. Also during New York City Nonprofit Week as well. And very luckily, we have a group of folks called nonprofit leaders in the Mayor's Nonprofit Advisory Councils, over 30 nonprofit leaders. And I work with them on a weekly basis to make sure that they're aligned and knowledgeable about all the things we're doing in this administration to get folks paid.
Okay. I just have one more question regarding my bill. I know that you all have several ways that you've taken issue with it, but I'm going to let the chair address most of that. The bill creates 25% quarterly advances, right? The money's already budgeted for these services, and the only question is whether vendors pay interest to banks or whether we provide working capital in a timely way. What would need to change in order to make this possible?
Thank you, Speaker Adams, for the question. Um, in terms of what would need to change, it really depends on the details on the implementation of this quarterly advances. Specifically, the system is not currently capable to pivot that quickly in order to support it. At present, again, as stated in the testimony, the way the system is set up, after a certain amount of funds are advanced, we also have to recoup. And absent that, the system that is a guardrail in place, we do not have the ability to just quickly pivot. In addition to the system readiness, the staff readiness, establishing the processes so that it is uniformed across the different agencies will take some time. And also preparing the change management effort in support of the nonprofit vendors so that they too are aware what the process is. So it's a longer term strategy in terms of informing, as your previous question on how do we keep them informed. A change of this nature impacting so many different nonprofit providers of varying sizes, we need to work and partner with them so that they're trained, but also that our staff knows what is the process, and it will take adequate amount of time to get the system ready.
Is OMB a part of this process that you need to make this happen?
Yes, Speaker Adams, OMB is definitely a part of the conversation.
Would they need to change how it allocates funds?
That is a question that I will take back to my agency partners as well as OMB. So in terms of the funding, they are the lead there. So I would have to defer to them on what structures need to change in order to be ready for that.
Okay. My bill also creates a pilot program for contracts over $1 million starting January 2027. How many contracts would potentially be covered by this pilot?
Thank you, Speaker Adams, for that question. I do not have the actual number of contracts that would be impacted, but I will be able to get that information from my team by end of day.
Okay. Overall question, do you believe quarterly advances would improve vendor retention and increase the number of qualified vendors who decide to bid on city contracts?
Thank you, Speaker Adams, for the question. Generally, I would say we agree that quarterly advances for providers having access to more capital to run programs and services, we are in favor of that. We just want to we want to understand what's the implementation, what does it look like, what's needed for the system, what process and policies. So yes, in favor of, we need time to be able to determine the best way to achieve that.
Do you believe the premise is fiscally responsible?
Again, Speaker Adams, thank you for the question. I want to be honest. I think it's responsible to ensure that providers have access to capital to do the services that we're asking them and contracting them to do. Again, the devil is always in the details, and I will never speak on behalf of OMB in terms of what it looks like, but we will never be opposed to getting providers money to do the work that we're asking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Adams. I think the idea is very compelling. I think actually Councilmember Brewer at the April hearing brought this up, and I think the way you characterize it, Councilmember Brewer, is the state does 100% advances. And so we've had follow-up conversations with OMH who does this. And I think there is a real compelling aspect of the predictability for both providers and city agencies. Now, I would say there's a real opportunity as well, provided we get the details right. I was talking with a very prominent nonprofit leader earlier this week who has these OMH contracts that have quarterly advances. And he was saying, as Yesenia said, the devil's in the details. There's a real opportunity to have a paradigm shift, like a legacy building paradigm shift from our reimbursement model that we have now to a wholly fundamentally new model. And I would personally really want to make sure we get it right, both for our providers, but maybe most importantly for New Yorkers who deserve these services, and we need to make sure the services are delivered. The opportunity that also might be here is to make sure that we have a standardized audit process. I think it's fair to say right now in the city we do not have a standard audit process. The feds do, the state does to do their quarterly advances. And from a provider's perspective, they don't have a one city audit experience. It's often 3 to 5 years afterwards. It's not timely. It doesn't follow their financial plan. And so if we could use this as an opportunity to enable quarterly advances via standardized audits, give the city more visibility into finances from our providers, that I think is an appropriate guardrail with respect to moving towards this reimbursement model. But I think things like that really require us to have the time and the right runway to make sure that we get this right. But it's so compelling that I think we deserve to have the oxygen to get it right.
I hear all of that, and I hear your argument. from the perspective of those that have been waiting to get paid in excess of millions of dollars. My perspective and the goal of this legislation is to stop this. I mean, we're talking about letting the agency, letting Mox ramp up to meet what you need to make this happen. But we're not taking a look at the nonprofits that have had to sit back and jeopardize payroll and jeopardize their livelihoods and jeopardize their employees and so on and so on and so on. And I said all that just to ask, because we're looking in a reverse perspective from my lens. What is your time frame to ramp up, to make this possible, so that these nonprofits and these providers that are the engine of this city get paid responsibly?
I'll start. I think it's totally the right question, Speaker Adams. I think certainly not 10 weeks, certainly not in the middle of a fiscal year and as a new administration is going to start up. I think typically you'd want to start this at the start of a new fiscal year. Now, I think Yesenia will rightfully point out there's a lot of activities that happen in the third and fourth quarter of a fiscal year that get us to start off the fiscal year on a right footing. So those are considerations that we'd have, but certainly not in 10 weeks, certainly not in the middle of a fiscal year.
Has that work started yet? It has, right? Yes.
Thank you for the question, Speaker Adams. I definitely want to piggyback off of what my counterpart is sharing in terms of the timeline. And when thinking about, yes, we're having conversations, we're engaging, but a lot more has to go into it in terms of determining when we can start. I don't want to be irresponsible in throwing out a time frame because I know that our providers, nonprofit providers, are listening and they want to be able to get ready. And we want to be responsible in any date that we put forth. But again, we need to talk about what implementation could look like, and we need to discuss what's needed for the system. So in terms of specs for the system and how do providers engage with the system currently, what needs to change or shift at their offices, what needs to shift and change at our agency partners. That's not something that we take lightly. And so in order to give a specific time frame, we need more conversations. And while we are, again, the concept and the idea of the bill, we wholeheartedly believe in getting money out the door, but we want to make sure that we're taking the time needed to have conversations with our counterparts at the agencies to discuss what is really needed to do this effectively. We've all, as specifically at Mox, we've launched things, we've put things out in the atmosphere, we try to pivot, but we've also learned from doing things hurriedly and rushing to move things along, and there were a lot of missteps. We're looking to avoid that, and during the start of this calendar year, there are a lot of activities that we do in terms of preparing our providers and preparing contracts to be registered on time so that we can avoid the payment delays and the lack of the ability to invoice and the need for having loans and accruing interest. That is a very critical time for the sector, for agencies, and any impact on that can be even more detrimental if we don't do this the right way.
I hear you. And before I go, and again, I'm going to yield to my colleagues. I'll just say this: our providers deserve all the time that you have and that you can give them to get this right. We want this right as well. But what I dare say is that we are not willing to jeopardize any more lost funding for them that they rightfully deserve for services already provided. And I yield back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Speaker Adams. I also want to recognize Councilmember Ina Vernikov has joined us. So I want to pick up a few things as follow-up questions. For Intro 1012A, can you help me understand why there isn't a current data snapshot of how many providers remain unpaid? Because you provided in your testimony 88% of human service contracts were submitted on time for fiscal year 26. So can your team right now, before our hearing is over, get that data that she was requesting about how many outstanding contract payments we currently have and how many nonprofits are currently registered with the City of New York for a contract?
Thank you, Chair One. So I will, my team is here. I'm sure they're watching. We will do our best to get you that data before the end of this hearing. But if not, like I said, within 24 hours, we would be able to provide that.
For previous fiscal years, can you help me understand what progress we've made in getting the payments paid on time? As the MONS director has testified, we've had many council members reach out with nonprofits that have not been paid in 10 years, 5 years, any years in between, and they continue to sit without payments for services rendered many years ago.
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I'll say a few data points that I think tell me that we're moving in a really strong direction. If you look just like at the contract backlog, at the start of this administration in 2022, that number was over $11 billion. The contract backlog has been reduced by 74% since 2022. Even since the start of this calendar year, the contract backlog, total backlog has gone down 40% since January. That's a significant reduction in months and in the last few years. And again, I think one of the things, if you're really focused on backlogs, is discretionary contracts and how that is 64% of our discretionary backlog. And so we didn't just accept that. That's where I think we had really strong collaboration with your side, with the Speaker's office, to come up with a grant pilot to directly address that. And then if you look at other places, the speaker was talking earlier about exorbitant bank loan interest rates that providers have to take on. That's really hard to hear because we do have a vehicle for that MOX runs with the Fund for the City of New York. It's the Returnable Grant Fund, which is an interest-free loan that folks should be applying for. When they apply, they're welcome to flag their application for me and their chief nonprofit officer. Last fiscal year, I think MOX and the Fund for the City of New York administered over $100 million to nonprofit providers that were in need of it. And then even if you look qualitatively, as I mentioned, we do a provider sentiment survey on a quarterly basis. Sentiment, which I think is very important as well, from our providers has gone up 10% over the course of this year. So I think they're feeling that their concerns are being responded to. We have, under MOX leadership, higher than ever timeliness rates. And so we're seeing really strong trend lines.
When I tell folks to apply for the returnable grant fund, they say that it isn't enough and they don't get it. So what is the total amount that you have this fiscal year, and you believe that the 100 million is enough for all of the contracts that we currently have in the city of New York?
Thank you for the questions, Chair Wan. I don't have the exact number, exact amount of what's in the fund as it speaks. We will never say that it's enough. In terms, we've done over $42 billion in terms of contracting if you look at MOX indicators for fiscal year 25. So 100 million, it may seem like a drop in the hat. However, we always welcome more funds, but even with that, what we've known in terms of the returnable grant fund, we have to continue to build awareness so that providers know that it is available, it is interest-free. We do constant outreach. We work with agency partners to identify those that may be in need prior to it being established. Again, it's just making sure that folks understand how to access the funds. And we work with agency partners because even if the fund is not available to them, there are other ways and methods that agencies are able to get funds out the door. So we use all of the different practices and tools that we have at our disposal to help to alleviate the burdens for the nonprofit providers.
What do you think is an ideal amount or a practical amount to actually help the service providers to expand the returnable grant fund to than the current amount? Like if you had a magic wand and you could blow a candle and get this wish.
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I would not be the one to tell you the exact amount. I will get that. I do think that begs a little bit of conversation with my team, but we can get you back a magic wand number. I love best case scenario and pie in the sky, so we will share a number. We will get that to you.
Okay, and I have a follow-up question for what I was asking earlier. So for the contract backlog, you said 74% reduction, and then it went down again to 40%. Can you give us a dollar amount of what's outstanding?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. Right now, our current backlog is under $3 billion from a high of over $11 billion in 2022.
Okay. For the 25% advance, since you already have the contact information, you have the emails of the providers who are currently in contract with the City of New York, can you please send out a writing, whether it be a digital flyer or an email, to allow them to know that there's the 25% advance that you guys have launched as a pilot?
Thank you, Chair Wan. Absolutely. Mox actually communicates regularly with providers. We have our contracting news, we have access to all of their information, and we communicate regularly with them. Initially, in testimony, I mentioned the Payment Task Force, who are also in constant communication with the nonprofit providers. We also partner with our agency partners so that we're always sending communications, and we're trying to get that information in front of them however possible. We use all modes of communication. So we're not opposed to sending communication or continuing to send communication to those that are eligible for it.
If I may, Chair Wan, I'd also just want to make sure the 25% advance, that's a standard, right? And that, again, that is a less than 10 years old standard. It's a relatively newer thing for city government. This year was 50% for many of our contracts and 30% for the agencies that are here today. And just want to be very clear, we do communicate that out. I know the speaker had that question as well, but there was nothing that a provider needed to do really to get that advance. That's a standard thing that at the start of a fiscal year and at the start of a registered contract, agencies initiate those advances out to their nonprofit providers. So it's not a case where somebody has to raise their hand for it. That's standard process.
Okay, great. But I
Or somebody has to raise their hand for it. That's standard process.
Okay, great. But I think it would be great if you both took a victory lap to allow them to celebrate, because this is huge. Because I think at the essence of it, it sounds like to me we're all in agreement that we do want to make fundamental departures from the city reimbursement-based payment model. That is what we hear directly from our providers. They don't want to be in reimbursement jail because they are taking out loans and taking high interest for it. So am I hearing you correctly that we're all aligned on moving towards advances in support of Intro 1012A?
Thank you, Chair Wan. So we are absolutely in support of getting the money out the door to the providers. It's all about the details and the implementation. So I think what myself and my colleagues, we just want to make sure that we have the processes in place to do so successfully.
Okay, and since we were talking about vendors currently spending lines of credit, and you both are aware, has the administration had formal studies on how much vendors currently spend on lines of credit while waiting for a contract registration and payment per each fiscal year?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. Currently, we do not have a study. We do know in terms of the vendors of the provider communities that we are directly engaging with and who are letting us know, but I'm sure there are many others that might be experiencing that we are not aware of. So we continue to push out. We work with council members, we work with agency partners to make sure that we have robust communication so that they know how to access us so that we can have a better awareness of what it is they're experiencing. Likewise, this is how we have the ability to inform them of the returnable grant fund. I am still amazed by how many nonprofit providers don't know how to access that.
Okay, because we would like to know the rough estimate or the aggregate of how much they are actually spending in lines of credit, waiting for their contract payment.
Chair Wan, I think that's a great idea. We'll follow up to see if there's a way we can get that information. I do want to just make sure you and every council member knows we would really love your partnership in making sure providers know about the RGF and the bridge loan. When I have done roundtables with other council members, as Yesenia said, it is disheartening when folks don't know about it or think they have heard about it but don't realize that it's a one-page application or that it's interest-free. So that kind of information, if that's something you want me to come to your district and do a roundtable and make sure people are aware of that, I'm really happy to do so and would really appreciate your partnership.
I think it would be a great flyer or email to send to all the contract providers, because most of the people who are in this room who are very active and engaged are definitely aware. But what I do hear from my district when I hammer them, they're like, oh, we're not going to get it because the fund is too small. So that's why we've asked the deputy contract executive director to get us a magic number so that we could work towards that goal of expanding it. And I hope that the comptroller currently or the future comptroller is listening to this so that we can. Do you agree that this is unconscionable that these funds are going to banks instead of being used in city services for residents? These banks are making a lot of money.
Chair Wan, thank you for the question. The statement, I think we are in agreement. We want the service, the money for the services to be spent on providing the services for the city of New York. We know that this is a lot of money that some may consider wasted. They have a lot of things to do with these funds. We know what the nonprofit providers are doing on a daily. We thank them. I always say they're doing the Lord's work. So we are as upset about it, and we are doing a lot of active steps. We're working feverishly. We're collaborating. We're thinking about different ways in which we could support them. RGF is one of many tools that we have in our toolbox in which to address these issues. Items such as advances and others is another tool, but we need to make sure that we're addressing the underlying comprehensive root cause of these problems, which we've been tackling for many years, which clearing the backlog, the timeliness initiatives. These are all different resources and the timeliness initiatives. These are all different resources and efforts that we are doing to help to mitigate those problems of interest.
What technical challenges would MOX face in creating the integrated digital procurement and contract management system required by Intro 1012A?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. Technical challenges, as we know, Passport, we've experienced more than a few. I think what it is that we really have to have a comprehensive conversation and analysis of our current processes, our current technology in place, have a real roadmap in terms of where it is that we would like to go. What are all of the different types of procurements, all the different stakeholders that are engaging with the system? So we need to sit down and map that out. I don't think we would be able to identify one particular technical challenge. Just know that the city of New York has the most complex procurement system in the country, if not that of the world. So in order to even embark on such a venture, and I love change. I'm probably amongst, not most people would be as advantageous in terms of doing that. It will be a very detailed process, engaging all stakeholders to ensure that we have fully documented all of their requirements in order to translate that to what we currently have, or if we wanted to develop an alternative system.
Okay, well, we look forward to partnering with you to go on this fun adventure together. I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Brewer because she has a few questions as well.
Thank you. I don't know about fun adventures, but I appreciate the work that you've done, and thank you, Michael, for all your leadership on this. So I guess picking up on the speaker, I know you talked about some data that you didn't have, but is there, so how many providers have taken out loans or credit lines to maintain services because of delays? Is that a number that you have, or something that also you'd have to get back to us?
See, in terms of how many providers taken out loans, we would have to get back to you, as that's something that most providers are keeping. That's their own record keeping.
Okay.
We would have to engage with the sector to get a full awareness of what that is.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for all of us to know. And then I'm just wondering, because this is always an issue with all agencies, staffing changes, what would be needed to ensure agencies can process quarterly advances on schedule if, in fact, such a process is implemented?
Thanks so much for the question, Councilmember. I think it's the right question, but I think in all honesty, we don't know yet. That's, I think, part of what we want to do in a rulemaking process. Some of the considerations, I think as are stipulated in the bill are, how do we ensure that we have reimbursable reports for the state and Fed so we don't lose that funding? That's a serious risk. What do we do with invoices? Are we doing invoices? Do we have expense reports? Do we have certified financial reports like the state does? And then how do we ensure that there's that robust and comprehensive audit process that the state and feds do? So I think those are the things that we'd want to think through. And then we would look at, well, do we have the current staff in place and do we retrain them to the new model? Or do we have to get new staff? It would certainly be a change, I can tell you that. It's just we don't have the policy articulated yet to understand what the staffing implications would be.
I believe that, as you know, state and federal grants already include, at least in most cases, advanced payment models. So I want to understand, is that mostly true? And then, of course, we would like to be funded similarly. Is that true in terms of federal and state, if we still have any federal left?
Thank you, Council Member. I can't speak to the specifics of the state and federal policies. I can defer to any of my colleagues. But yeah, that is the question. I don't feel the most knowledgeable.
Hi, Counselor.
Hi.
So,
I'm just Gail. I'm fine. Thank you.
Gal, thank you. So,
I'm just Gail. I'm fine. Thank you.
Gal, thank you so much. So, of about $137 million of New York State contracts in particular for indigent legal services, constitutional right to representation, 4 appeals providers, 6 trials providers, and 4 Article 10 family representation providers.
Right.
We work closely with the state to ensure that those contracts are being administered in line with the program objectives. They are eligible for advances, and they do receive currently 30% advances under the current city framework right now that MOCJ is a part of. It would speak to, I think, the concerns and the points that my colleagues have raised, that we would need more of a runway to understand exactly what the impact would be for 25% advances each quarter. We're committed to making a pilot that works for everybody, providers that are funded by city tax levy, by state funding, and we want to be good partners in that. We're Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice is a relatively new agency.
Not that new. I've been around a long time. You're not that new.
Around a long time, right?
Yeah, I've been around longer than them, but still, they've been around for a while.
We go back in the charter from the 70s. When
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, I'm sure, right? But we separated off from the mayor's office 2 years ago, and a part of that has been established on our own budget, financial contract and processes. So these are all the different dynamics that go at play when we're
But
evaluating an impact.
The state ones that you work with, they find it easier to work with on that 30%. I know you're not the audit, you're not the oversight, but do you find anecdotally it works better?
It's actually a little more difficult because the state has very stringent requirements in terms of what can be reimbursed. So our institutional providers incur the expenses under the contract, and then MOCJ submits for reimbursement to the state. And it is very often the case that the state will disallow costs. Even something as simple as a $10 travel voucher sometimes gets disallowed. So that speaks to the need to ensure that we have this process established up front in a way that is compliant and in line with state and other oversights.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Just in terms, I don't know what the percentage is. I don't know if it's 30% or higher. MBWE, minority women-led nonprofits. I assume that those payment, if there are delays, are there more payment delays with that community? Sometimes they don't have the infrastructure or the support, or is it sort of the same across the board? Often they're smaller many times.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Council Member. I will say we see similar challenges with the smaller businesses, minority-owned businesses, because they don't have the infrastructure
Right. That's what
as
I'm
larger organizations.
All right, so that's still an issue. We hear a lot from the nonprofits that months pass between service delivery and payment. Is there a current average payment timeline for these contracts from registration to first disbursement? I know it's different in every case, but is there some kind of average?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We can get you the specifics on the average, but again, we do at MOX, we work with agency partners because the goal is the 30 days. And while we know there are many, there are instances in which it's outside of that,
Yep.
but our agency partners, specifically for fiscal year 26, have done a phenomenal job in terms of contracts being registered on time, which means that invoicing can begin. And I want to say that I mentioned in the testimony, we had 88% as of July. So we've been working on that steadfastly, which means they have the ability to invoice. Our payment task force have been working directly with the nonprofit providers to address any challenges or blockers that have been in the system. So while I don't have the exact number in front of me, we can get that to you, but we have seen market improvement from all
The reason
agencies.
I ask, of course, we don't hear about the ones that are going smoothly. We only hear about the ones that aren't. And so that's the challenge that we have.
If I may, Council Member, I think the majority of the inquiries we get from the council are focused on discretionary contracts. And again, by design, those are retroactive because we find out on the first day of the fiscal year, and that starts the registration process. So for those discretionary contracts, the average is over 360 days just for registration. And then we talk about invoicing and budgeting, et cetera. So that's why the grant pilot is so radical. And that's why it was helpful for us to have that collaboration and real due diligence together to get that right, because it's taking a process that really does not fit what the nature of those contracts are. They are grants, into a condensed process where we're actually upfronting 100% of the funds after the grant agreement is agreed to. So I think from a backlog perspective, that's like one of the more pernicious things in contract payment, because you can't pay until the backlog until it's registered. It's worst in discretionary contracts. Other places, though, we've seen really good cycle time reductions across the board from an invoicing standpoint this year. So encouraging positive signs.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Council member, I'd just like to jump in because this is what technology is for. And one of my team members were able to share that our average cycle time for invoices for fiscal year 26 is 16 days.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Brewer. What is the total value of the city's contracting budget, and how much of it did we spend on council discretionary contracts? We'd appreciate the advance payment on those, but it's just a drop in the bucket, especially for all of our our service providers who are extremely frustrated by the rhetoric that we constantly only talk about discretionary contracts from the city, which is such a low dollar amount compared to the millions of dollars that they're owed.
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. As mentioned, fiscal year 25, the contracting dollar amount was over 42 billion. I can get you the specific amount later on in terms of what the discretionary portfolio is. So at Mox, we're focusing on all retroactivity. In all of our partners, retroactivity is a thing that we would like to do away with. And we do acknowledge that there are much larger contracts that are retroactive and not just the discretionary. So we're looking at this as a comprehensive issue and want to address all of the retroactivity. But we can get you more finite numbers.
So we've spent a few years now talking about discretionary contracts for the city council. What is the plan for non-discretionary contracts from the city council that continue to be paid, continue to face payment delays for our providers?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I think the reason we spend so much time on discretionary is not because it's where the pain is most felt, but is where I think ourselves and agencies have to spend a lot of time. And some years it's less than 5% of our total human service spend. That is definitely true. But it's also somewhere up to a third or 40% of our contracting actions. And those are related to agencies, right? Like agencies have to process those. They have to work on invoices. They have to work on budget modifications, et cetera. So in terms of the plan, that's why we felt compelled to do the higher than ever advances this fiscal year. We're at a vastly different place now than when we talked in April with 50% advances. We're less than 4% of the way through the fiscal year, and most folks have not even gotten to the full amount that has been advanced to them. In addition, what we do is through ContractStat, it is really a performance management tactic where we're keeping our eye on the ball. On a monthly basis, we have set up the infrastructure with chief nonprofit officers at every agency to hold them accountable to that quantitative and qualitative cycle time, and work in partnership with them to find out if there are issues that we can work on together to improve. So we're seeing market reduction. Yesenia just mentioned the 16-day cycle time for invoices. That's down from 20 last year. So in a lot of the ways in which we can quantify the different inhibitors to payment, we're seeing positive trend lines.
I am definitely all for freeing up our Mox and other procurement employees to make sure that they can focus on the big dollar value. So $42 billion, less than 5% of that, less than $4 billion is sorted out from the discretionary contracts. So we want to make sure that we're focusing. We like to hear that it's 16 days now instead of 20, but we need to hear more about what exactly is in the pipeline for making sure that the bulk of the 42 billion is moving through and getting paid, as well as people are still sending me questions about the previous years of payments that are still delayed. So can you give us an update on what you all are doing for prior year contracts that are yet to be paid out still?
Thank you.
And I appreciate and celebrate the backlog that you guys were clearing even until now, this cycle. So please give us another update.
Thank you, Chair Wan, for the question. Like mentioned, as you stated yourself, we are actively working on the backlog. It's an ongoing conversation and process. It's not a one and done. All of our efforts continue. The fully seating of the payment task force, which is as of this past July, is also going to help us in addressing the more retroactive contracts. So it's an ongoing dialogue and conversation in partnership with agency partners, working with the nonprofit providers for providing, invoicing and closing out those prior fiscal years to be able to address the backlog. So it's not something that is just we have not moved on. We are now rallying the troops, and again, the payment task force's main goal is really to work on the backlog, the retroactivity, ensuring that invoices are moving through on time. So while we are working on the backlog, we are also ensuring that going forward for fiscal year 26, we are improving so that we're not having the conversation next fiscal year about 26. So we're steadily moving in the right direction. A lot more can still be done, but we are very positive with the results that we've been receiving with the payment task force under the leadership of our Deputy Director of Finance and our Deputy Director of the Nonprofit Office. We have been working in partnership with MONS and other umbrella groups in order to bring awareness and just really having the conversation about what is owed and what is needed from the providers to be able to close these things out. So it's ongoing.
If I may, Chair One, would you mind? Thanks for that question as well. And actually, thanks because in April, the advocates testified after we testified. And I think my eyes were open to how big of an issue the indirect cost rate reimbursement was. I was not appreciating that. I was focusing more on getting payments out and budget modification delays, invoice delays, et cetera. And in many ways, those are costs that we don't see, right? Because it has to go through a process. So I can't just pull a report and easily tell you, here's how much we owe across the board from indirect cost rate. Mox has done a lot of great work with the indirect cost rate and reforming that, including moving up with the indirect cost rate and reforming that, including moving up the application window much sooner so that those can be reflected in budgets. This year, they also directed agencies to include that indirect cost in the baseline budget. I can tell you providers very much appreciate that as well. And our office are starting a new campaign called the PAID campaign. I love a good acronym. Prompt Action for Indirect Deltas, in which we're working agency by agency to actually identify that delta between the de minimis and what their accepted rate was going back previous fiscal years, to your point. It will not be an easy process by any means, but we have good partnership with other oversight entities, also aided and abetted by the directive Mox did earlier this year that was really clear to agencies. They actually did this in partnership with OMB. The directive went out and said, you must pay indirect costs to agencies. This is not a can do or you must do or you should do. You have to pay the indirect cost rate. We have to honor that accepted rate. And that was really helpful in clarifying, I think, to our agencies who, this is a newer process, I think are just had been adjusting to what that process and policy situation would be.
Thank you. Also, what I'm trying to understand, for every single fiscal year, the money that is being contracted out is already budgeted. So it's not about finding new money for the spend for OMB. So help me understand, if we're just, for this bill for the speaker, 1012A, if we're just changing who pays the interest, and right now it's nonprofits serving our most vulnerable communities, does that mean that for this current fiscal year or future fiscal years, do we have to expand the budget to pay them? Because if we avoid their interest payments by paying them upfront, then we all save money. So I'm just trying to understand where the reservations are coming from fiscally.
Thank you, Chair Wan. I want to make sure that I understand the question correctly. So while we are addressing, again, I think Mox's goal and all of my colleagues here today, the goal is to get contracts registered on time. If contracts are registered on time, providers can invoice. which means they don't have to take out loans if they're actually being paid on time for the services. We're addressing the cycle time delays. We're tracking in terms of the retroactivity. There's a lot to be cleaned up. We've initiated multiple backlogs, mocks, and partnership with agencies. We're steadily addressing backlogs, but there is a lot to continue to unpack. But what we're ensuring is that going forward, we have the right processes in place, the system is ready, the providers are aware, so that at least from FY26 and forward, we don't have these issues. But we have to acknowledge that there is a backlog, there is retroactivity, there is interest being accrued that's not being addressed. So while the budgets are fully funded for the current fiscal year, and if we're getting the money out on time, we don't have to consider the interest. But there will be additional conversations that need to be had, and we welcome having offline conversations to discuss what is needed to make providers whole. But MOX is adequately tracking the way implementation, COLA, ICR, to ensure that at the minimum, and to Executive Director Cedillo's point, we are communicating, we are making sure that our agency partners know that the money is there in their budgets for the current fiscal year. There are still other conversations that has to be had regarding the outer years.
So for us, it's less about invoicing, and the vendors are still stuck in reimbursement hell. Quarterly payments create predictability so they can plan fiscally, just like any of us who have to keep a budget. And clearing the backlog and getting contracts registered on time is only good in a perfect world. But in admin, if it is perceived that you all are dragging your feet to put them right back in the same place, quarterly advances solve that problem. So we are really trying to push for quarterly payments for them.
Thank you, Chair Wan. So again, we acknowledge the issues with the delays. I want to say we are, again, proud of the 88% registration of on-time contracts, because that means 88% of those contracts, those providers, are not accruing interest on loans because they're looking to render services. So if we continue to focus on getting to 100% of on-time contract registration for the current fiscal year and beyond, this is a way in which we can achieve and mitigate having to worry about the advances. And advances is a tool. We are not opposed to it. We just need to understand and have conversations on how do we implement that so that it can be done successfully, so that it can be done consistently from agency to agency, as these providers are contracted with some of the same providers, and we need them to have a uniformed experience so that they can readily access that money.
Yeah, we're happy to strategize with you and work with you to get this done. How can MOX make sure the new integrated contract management system doesn't encounter the same technical difficulties as Passport? And if there's any specific lessons you've learned to inform new system development?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I don't know if I think you were looking at my computer. This is what we have been doing at MOX for the past, I want to say, 2 years. A part of making sure that we don't experience the same challenge is learning from those lessons, that what we've experienced in terms of user friendliness. We want to engage with the sector. We want to engage with all of the vendors that are impacted, that have to utilize the system. We need to engage with agency partners to really understand what their processes look like so that we can create a more uniform process before we then transform that into a digital system. So while there were many savings and efficiencies realized as a result of Passport, I think we are also at a place in the system where when we initiated this process, we didn't know that this is where we would be. The level and the nature of the complexity of New York City's procurement is extensive, and it means that we need to have conversations with the right individuals to develop a system that is going to actually enable procurement, make it more equitable, and streamline processes for providers, small, large, MWBEs, and more also important, that agencies are able to do their work. So conversations, having real engagement, building a system reflective of the processes and the people that are engaging with it is what's necessary, so that we're not back at the place that we are now, working our way out of a technical deficit, but we've made constant strides in terms of improving the system.
Would you be willing to work with state partners to bring non-participating agencies like the DOE under the Passport umbrella and this expansion with this new integrated contract management system?
Thank you, Chair Wan. Oh, absolutely. We are willing to work with any partners. DOE is an agency that we've been in conversations with for over 2 years, and I'm sure the conversations have happened before me. We are ready, willing, and able to have those conversations. Again, it's about making sure that their offline processes, their current procurement processes align with the current technology so that we don't create yet another technical hurdle for the many providers that contract with the DOE and other agency partners.
Okay. How much do you think it'll cost to build the system envisioned by Intro 1012A or build out the expansion to Passport to do this?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I do not have an actual number. Again, I think and I also want to ensure that we're engaging with technical leaders to understand what's the different softwares and that is available, the different models of which we could replicate and or build something. So we would have to do the engagement with the many stakeholders and then introduce a technical partner, because while we have expertise overseeing Passport, the development of a system of that scale, that digital transformation, we would need technical experts beyond that of who we currently have access to.
Makes sense. So we'll wait for the financial estimate. Contracting agencies currently use multiple systems: Passport, FMS, Legacy, HHS Accelerator, alongside various agency-specific platforms. Could the integration system envisioned by Intro 1012A consolidate all of these? Or do you already have a plan to consolidate all of these in the pipeline? If so, what phase? And what agencies or contract types would be the most challenging to integrate from your perspective?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. That is, it's many tiers and levels to that. I would say we absolutely have conversations with the different agencies and other complementary and supplementary systems that all of our agency partners are engaging with. That is a much longer term strategy and roadmap. Our goal is to figure out how to first develop the efficiencies. It may mean consolidation of some of the systems, or it may mean just having a better, more robust sharing of the data amongst the systems. A prime example would be the decommissioning of HHH Accelerator and adding that functionality to Passport. Similarly, we've added some subcontractor functionality to Passport. The advent of Passport was the sunsetting of APT and Vendex. So the city has been making strides towards creating a true end-to-end system. We've been looking for ways in which to build efficiencies, but we wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able in this moment to say which systems would be sunsetted and what functionality needs to be added, because we want to ensure that whatever we do, it's a helpmate and not a technical challenge or blocker that we're introducing.
Okay. As you can tell by the amount of questions we had on this bill, this is a top priority for the council, for our human service providers, all the nonprofits that we work with, all the vendors, and as well as Speaker Adams for her legacy. So we will continue to have very active conversations with you. I'm going to move on to other questions. Roughly 80% of all contracts in fiscal year 25 were registered late, and 90% of human services contracts were registered late. Why has the late registration crisis persisted despite multiple reform efforts over the last several years? Can you just help us understand the primary bottlenecks causing the late registration? It seems like you were able to figure some things out, because we're about halfway into fiscal year 26 and you are now at 88% completed in registration on time. So help us understand the evolution under your leadership.
Thank you, Chair Wan. A part of, I will say, the reason why FY26 has been so successful is because we've been building on the lessons learned and really working with agency partners to identify what are some of their blockers in order to move things through the system quickly. We've moved up our pre-processing, which starts as early as January and February, which is what we did last calendar year. We initiated the process to enable agencies and providers tracks registered on time. I also want to acknowledge the HHS migration from Accelerator to Passport, which while we had no choice due to the system needing to be sunset because of vulnerabilities, we acknowledge that that also introduced complexities and additional workloads and burdens for the prior fiscal year for agency partners, of which we've been steadily regaining ground on. So there are certain system implications that impacted previous year's delays that doesn't identify or acknowledge all of the challenges that are leading to delays, but it speaks to the effort that we've all done collectively to be able to move to the place of getting 100% on-time registration.
Okay. Which agencies have the worst late registration rates, and what is being done to hold them accountable?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. While I don't have the data in front of me of worst offender, but as I know that there are many things that contribute to why an agency is experiencing late registration, there are so many different nuances. There are aspects of things that are being requested from providers that they are not yet in receipt. It could be a system challenge. So there are many aspects of what contributes to it. So I do not have which agency currently has the least or the not the best record in terms of registering, but the steps that we are taking, I will say in terms of the payment task force, we've established financial dashboards in order to help track and monitor the agency's responsiveness, how they're turning things around, identify trends and bottlenecks, of which the payment task force works with each agency individually to help them move things along throughout the process. Similarly, they also have the ability to now work and partner with the nonprofit providers to ensure that we're looking at the comprehensive picture in terms of moving these items forward.
And Chair Wan, if I may, I do have some agency data in front of me. I don't know if this is the appropriate forum to air the agency, but put them on blast without context, I think, on this space. But I will say, as I mentioned in my testimony, transparency, very important to me. In the preliminary mayor's management report starting in January, that kind of data we're planning on making available to the public and to you all. So I would look out for that starting in January. I will say, not to be a broken record, I caught that you guys don't want to talk about discretionary much anymore. But again, if the conversation is about backlog, it cannot be decoupled from discretionary contracts, which are inherently backlogged, 64% of our backlog. If you look at DYCD, for example, they're 81% of their backlog are discretionary contracts. That's 53% of our total backlog contracts, just DYCD discretionary contracts. So while the problem is multifaceted from a backlog standpoint, again, down 74% since the start of the administration, and we're seeing really positive trend lines there.
So would you share that with us privately?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I'm happy to brief you at any time you would like on some of the things that we're seeing from a data perspective.
Okay, so we'll follow up with the Contracts General Counsel for a private briefing on these numbers. Just working from memory, from what I remember from previous hearings, and I think DHS is in the room. So can you give us an idea of how DHS has been working through their backlog? If there's been any improvements or changes for DHS, as well as can you help me understand why you're opposed to the initial pilot for 1392?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I'll take the first question first. We've done a tremendous amount of work at DHS to reduce delays in contract registration, in budget approvals, in budget mod processing, and in invoices. And we've really taken a two-prong approach, which is really grounded in data, coordination, and communication. So internally, we rely heavily on data that comes out of Passport. So we are using that as a management tool day in and day out to identify trends, to identify where there are issues, to see where things are going well, because if there's an opportunity to replicate that, we certainly want to do that. We have many, many meetings where we're going contract by contract to understand what the nuances are. You've heard that a few times from my colleagues at the table. There is no one issue. And there's no one solution to these delays. So we take very seriously the need to really understand each contract, each budget. In addition, we work with our partners at the table to make sure that we're strategizing, we're learning about best practices, and making asks. So Mox has already removed one level in the invoice process, and that really gained us some ground with improving the invoice turnover rate. We are also reviewing our internal processes and procedures to make sure that everyone is following the same guidance so that our providers can expect a consistent approach to processing invoices. So that's really gained us some ground. So our processing time has dropped from 25 to 26 when it comes to invoice processing. Our second prong of our approach really is related to how we interact with our providers. It's very important to us that we have open communication, that we are meeting with providers regularly, and in fact, over the spring, we met with all 84 providers individually to hear their experience with the payment process. And as I learned very quickly, as I just said, there is no one issue. Everybody's experiencing things differently. We have many providers that have multiple contracts that are in different parts or touch points in the process. So it was important that we heard. In those meetings, we were able to resolve easy things right in the meeting, but a lot of follow-up was required after that as well. So maintaining that communication, make sure that we're listening to providers, we're taking their concerns seriously so that we can make meaningful change and really improve the process.
Has Mox or the mayor's office taken any disciplinary action against agency leadership for chronic late registrations?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. Disciplinary actions, I will say, a part of our financials dashboard. It is, as much as it is a tool for helping agencies identify trends, it is also a tool that we use for reporting up so that there is an awareness of what's needed to ensure that the agency partners have the resources in place to support the volume, and we get a better understanding of what's contributing to the delays. Again, there are, in terms of disciplinary, it's really on a case-by-case basis because of the level of nuances in terms of invoicing and the stage of which each invoice is at. We bring awareness with the data, so we make data-informed decisions, and we have the ability to bring it to the attention of our deputy mayors and the administration so that we know if and when additional pressure or support. We prefer to lead with the carrot, but in instances and we require additional steps, that's when we look to the administration to support us.
So has there ever been a time where you took additional steps for chronic non-payments?
I will say in terms of on a case-by-case basis, and it's more so it's about support. So we've had opportunities in which we've had to partner with agencies. We had to share resources in order to alleviate the backlog, and we work hand in hand with them. And that's a part of how we support our agency partners, because whether it's punitive or not, the goal is to make sure the invoices are paid. And I'm not privy to the different conversations that I would say in terms of the administration, but we do walk it up to ensure that there is a level of awareness and that they have the information needed.
Do ACOs at poorly performing agencies receive performance evaluations that reflect their failure to register contracts on time?
Thank you, Chair Wan, for the question. I'm not aware if ACOs are receiving performance reviews of that nature. But again, when contracts are being failed to be registered on time, there are so many different things that contribute to that. So oftentimes it means we have to have the conversation about what are the blockers, what's contributing to it, what's preventing them from moving things along. And we pull resources to be able to get things through. So I'm not privy if those types of performance reviews are happening, but I do know that we use the data to inform and to empower our agencies and the provider community.
Okay. Gentle parenting it is over here. For nonprofit organizations that have testified repeatedly about the devastating impact of late payments, taking out loans, cutting services, delaying payroll, and even closing programs, what is the administration doing now? Well, I feel like we talked about this. And How many city contracts are not city contracted nonprofits have closed, reduced services, or laid off staff? Oh, okay, I see. This is a question for testimony. Yeah, okay, this is just in the wrong place. I'm sorry. Does MOX have adequate staff with procurement expertise to provide technical assistance to all of the agencies as well as providers?
Thank you for the question, Chair Juan. And thankfully, we were able to say yes as a result of, I want to say, after the last hearing, we received a robust lines in order to support answering questions from the provider community, providing engagement and answering questions for our agency partners, the payment task force being fully staffed. All have positioned MOX to be able to provide that level of hands-on support, of which we do daily.
I feel like it was forever ago, but the Nonprofit Resiliency Committee and the task force to get nonprofits paid on time and the other initiatives and coalitions that have been built over the last term. Can you help me understand, have the recommendations made in 2022 by the Joint Task Force been fully implemented, which have not, and why?
Thank you for the question, Chair Juan. I don't have in front of me all of the recommendations, but MOX has been actively acting upon actioning many of those. The payment task force, for one, which I know you keep hearing, but it was something that was a long time coming that we are very excited that we were able to fully implement this past July. So I can have a team member, we can get you that information in terms of which recommendations we were not able to fully act on, but we have moved on many of those recommendations as they were very well informed and spoke to a lot of the issues and concerns that both agencies and providers were feeling alike.
Chair Juan, if I may, when that came out, I was working for former Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright, and there were a number of recommendations. I think there were 19 recommendations, if I remember correctly. Many of them have been accomplished. So one, I think they called for an allowance clause to be administered into contracts to reduce the reliance on amendments. MOX did that, I think, in the first or second year of the administration. It called on contract stat to be launched. That's been launched. It called on the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services to be fully staffed and set up. Obviously, that has happened. It shone a light on the discretionary contracting process and actually called on us to do something like the grant-like process, which, as you know, we have done. It also called on us to do a Lean Six Sigma process end-to-end to understand where the bottlenecks are in the contracting process, which we did earlier in this administration, and we're able to, from that, start the Nonprofit Steering Committee. The Nonprofit Resiliency Committee, which was in many ways the prerequisite to the office that I run now and the de Blasio administration. A lot of what came from there is still in play today. So the advance policy came from that. The indirect cost rate came from that. The HHS cost manual came from that, and that's all in existence today. So in many ways, we're continuing on the path that was blazed from the NRC in the previous administration.
Okay, we'll follow up for the line by line of what was not implemented and what the holdups are. So this is a sad question, but I must ask. What specific measurable goals will the administration commit to before leaving office due to reduce late registration rates and improve vendor payment timeliness, since there's only 2 months left?
Thank you for the question, Chair Juan. I don't know if there's a specific goal. The goal is to continue to get money out the door, working consistently and just steadily working on improving the processes, working with nonprofit providers, the payment task force, working with agency partners, partnering with MONS, engaging with the sector and understanding what their issues continue to be to make sure that we're being reflective and responsive to their needs. So I think with the short time that we have left, we have to continue to listen. I think I was just sharing earlier, MOX is doing a sentiment tour because we want to really understand if all of our efforts are making an impact. Because if not, this is a part of what we can prepare for a transition so that they're aware of what are the priorities and the goals to continue this work. even with little time, we're not going to stop the work. It's important that our partners know that they're supported and that we're doing everything that we can in order to get money to them. So it's not a one-day thing. This is a marathon and definitely not a sprint.
Okay, I'm just gonna put it out into the ether. Eric Adams, pay $30 billion before you leave in the next 2 months.
Do you mind if I answer that question, Chair?
Oh, sure.
Um,
Is that a yes to the 30 billion?
I actually didn't. I'm in my head already with the answer I'm going to give, so I didn't fully register what you had said. But I'm sure if it's about getting nonprofits paid, then I agree. Here are a few things that I would say. You asked for measurable goals. One, increase in the provider sentiment survey results. Again, this is a quarterly survey that our office sends to nonprofit providers. Seen an increase in 10% over the course of the year. We're doing it again in December. I would love to see an increase in that before the end of this calendar year. Continued decrease in invoice cycle time. Yesenia mentioned that it's 16 days this fiscal year. That's down from 20 days last year. I'd like to continue to see that be reduced, or at least stay at 16, below the 20 from last year. From a cycle time, from a POCR slash budget modification standpoint, I'd like to see that continue to go down. We're already seeing positive trend lines, significantly positive trend lines, and you have to give credit to Mox's Payment Task Force for staying really on it with agencies in that. I'd like to see a reduction in the backlog. Again, we're below $3 billion now. That's $3 billion too much, in my opinion. I'd like to continue to see that go down before the end of the calendar year. And then for the discretionary grant pilot, I would like to see all the grantees that made it to the clear list get their grant agreements in December so that they can get fully paid in January. So those are the indicators I'm looking at.
Okay, great. And $30 billion from Eric Adams before he goes. Intro number 1298. So we're going to move on. Today we heard about intro 1298, which expands the general insurance requirements created by local law 106 of 2024 for food service procurement to all city vendors. What has Mock's experience been with the rollout of local law 106? Are more small vendors able to meet contract insurance requirements and get the city to work? Have any challenges emerged from the implementation of local law 106?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. In terms of intro 1298, again, I think Mox's position is that we are concerned about the standardization of this because it does impact the smaller nonprofits. So we defer to the law department, but we do want to keep in mind that it does impact the competitiveness and can skew to be more unfair for smaller nonprofits.
Okay. So the current existing law would expand it to all city agencies? Okay. Yeah, because what we hear a lot is how a lot of small vendors actually are the ones who can't compete because they don't have the premium to pay for all of these different insurances, which agencies all have in order to serve the same food. So that's what we're trying to resolve.
Thank you for the clarification, Chair Wan. A part of that is also being mindful that all of the varying contracts all have a difference in scope. So it's not as simple to have one unified process. While we want to support smaller MWBEs and nonprofits to remain competitive, we also know that each of these contracts have different requirements across multiple agencies, but even within specific agencies. The varying scope of those contracts will require different variants in terms of insurance. But again, I am not a legal expert, despite what I may feel. So we defer to the law department on this.
Okay, we'll just take the discussion for 1298 offline with our legal expert to discuss, because it's clear that there's a clear problem, because we hear it from the vendors as well as nonprofit service providers who are getting treated, who are being served horrible food from large vendors who can afford to compete. And those who are mom and pop restaurants in the districts who want to compete can't afford all these insurance premiums for all of these agencies. We're going to move on to 1392. Oh, sorry, we did this already. Okay, we're going to talk about 1401. I had last seen you all at the joint hearing between contracts and parks because of concerns that have been raised by the public on conflict of interests that have been overlooked in city contracts by the Parks Department. So going off of that, we have a bill from Councilmember Yusuf Salam. How might labor and human rights disclosures allowed by this bill affect agency contracting awards in a negative way?
I'm sorry, Chair One. Can you repeat the question?
Okay, I'm going to skip that question because my general counsel wants me to ask the next question. What experience does Mox have with voluntary disclosures from bidders? And have bidders submitted information on, for instance, the environmental impacts of their supply chains, labor practices, or other social responsibility factors?
Thank you for the question, Chair One. So in terms of the voluntary disclosures, again, it's voluntary. What we have experienced is that in terms of the competitive nature among smaller vendors, it can lead to confusion and unfair competition. And so in terms of the disclosures, we want to ensure that we maintain an open, competitive process and not introduce things that may hinder the smaller entities from engaging with contracting with the City of New York.
What resources would Mox need to implement and oversee voluntary disclosure program? And what I'm trying to understand is right now we already have basically a self-reporting system. So continuing to add to self-reporting, I guess, I'm sorry, Councilmember Salam, is not effective. But we have to address the problem here, which is that vendors who are in jail for federal indictments, vendors who've had labor wage issues that are publicly reported, corruption, bribery, fraud, these people have been getting across in multiple agencies, and that's what the council is responding to. So can you help us, your ideas on how we're going to resolve for this? Because self-reporting is not working.
Thank you, Chair Wan, for the question. So while we do rely on self-reporting and we acknowledge that there are ongoing issues, this is work that we continue to actively address. We have the vendor integrity unit at MOX. Our risk team are always steadily combing the internet, looking for information, but we rely on the self-disclosure because it is the due diligence of those that are seeking to do business with the city to inform us. But even beyond that, MOX also actively researches and looks into it, but keep in mind the sheer volume of vendors of which we contract with. That is a very extensive process, and a part of it is that we have to rely on vendors being honest.
Okay, but they're not honest. So once they're found to not be honest, how do we stop them from continuing to get city contracts?
We do have access. Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. So we do have disclosures in the system. There are flags that we can put in Passport that all of our agency chief contracting officers have access to. They rely upon that. They look at what is self-disclosed. They look at the flags that the MOX team might identify. There are also ways all of the contracting agencies also have their own process of which to verify, validate, and review. And we share and leverage that information, and we ensure that that is accessible in Passport so that various contracting agencies can review said information before making an award. But we acknowledge that it's not a perfect system, and we are continually to work on that, and we welcome additional dialogue and conversations to figure out how to ensure that we have better guardrails in place.
Yeah, for one, I think we should not allow vendors who are debarred from the state to be vending with the city or being contract with the city. I just want to bring up that Local Law 127 of 2016 was a law passed requiring a voluntary disclosure program for ethnic and gender makeup of board of directors for city contractors. So this seems to be a similar bill, but you know, self-reporting is self-reporting. So I'll leave it at that, and you will have to negotiate it with Councilmember Salam. I just want to say for intro 1012A for codifying Passport, I think it's extremely important. Is this the right one? I'm sorry if I'm reading the wrong bill number. Oh, okay. I just want to flag that as someone who comes from tech, I think it's horrifying that you expect the same vendor who created your platform to be also doing oversight over your platform. Trying to see, I have taken notes. So my bill says that you have to have that it's going to be required for the city to have a third-party quality assurance vendor distinct from the platform developer, because it's the same thing as self-reporting, right? If I go to you, I'm like, hey, Mike Cedillo, how well did you do as Mon's director? He's gonna be like, I'm awesome. You know, same to you. We cannot be having quality assurance for Passport be done by the people who built Passport. They're all gonna be like, yeah, we're doing a great job. That's a huge problem. We can't have that, which is what's currently happening now.
Thank you, Chair Juan, for the question, and we are in agreement. However, it's a little bit more nuanced than the vendor who is contracted actually doing QA. We have ongoing performance testing that they have to perform, of which our tech team is responsible for reviewing. So it would be duplicative to have an external QA do that work, because we require it as a part of the ongoing system performance. It's routine. It's embedded in the work that they're doing, that they have to perform these metrics and provide that level of reporting. And I will say, I too come from a tech background, so it's not as though they get to fudge the report. We have access to the data. They have to explain it. The CTO meets with them on a regular basis. I myself sit in on meetings on a weekly basis to hear what's going on in the system. We are also monitoring internally, so it's not as if though we're asking them to report on themselves. They're giving us the performance metrics, but we have the ability to track and review it as well. And oftentimes we're coming to the same conclusions as they are.
Okay, I have serious concerns about quality assurance done by the same vendor that built it, but for the sake of time, we'll move on. Can the administration pause on recoupments to ensure that there's consistency for cash infusion? If no, why not?
Thank you, Chair Juan, for the question. Pausing on recoupment, again, the system currently, the way it's set up, after a certain amount of monies are advanced, there has to be a level of recoupment in order to ensure that more funds can go out the door. Last fiscal year, the city is still, there is about 700 fiscal year, the city is still, there is about $700 million that has still not been recouped. So there are guardrails in place to ensure that the funds that are going out of the door are adequately accounted for. So that's a guardrail that we can have conversations about what else can be put in place, but we do want to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible as well.
And how do you envision the admin to work with providers to reconcile advances to actual expenses throughout the year?
Thanks for the question, Chair. I think that's exactly the type of question we would want to think through, right? I mean, Yesenia talked about the hundreds of millions of dollars in recoupment that are owed. And to your previous question, I mean, right now, the way it's set up in our reimbursement model, we verify the services were delivered, and people like Robert send those invoices and expense reports to the state for reimbursement many times to show that the services were delivered. And really, there's no other way currently to recoup that advance, which again, the advance goes out. We have to show how the money was spent towards services other than a recoupment process. So going back to the advance directive, one of the things that was really helpful in that is that we asked agencies to articulate to each of their providers what their recoupment schedule was, which in many times had changed or even throughout the fiscal year been different among units within an agency, maybe not the agencies at this table, but other agencies perhaps. And so I think really it's about predictability and information sharing so that they know when recoupments can happen. But I think agencies are pretty flexible when providers reach out and note that they have a cash flow concern from a recoupment standpoint.
Okay, so more discussions to come for 1012A, but
Can I add that the state does not reimburse on advances? Okay, so if advances are not recouped, you will not get the reimbursement. So we have to be mindful of the revenue that's coming in.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for your presence today. Just on time. We're going to wrap up our testimony. I will speak to you both offline to meet our goals for the end of this year. Let's go, Eric Adams, $30 billion in payments before he leaves. We're gonna move on to public testimony. I will call you by panels. Kristen Miller, Catherine Trapani, Dr. Henry Love, Terry Troya, Dan Lemon. Okay, we can start from this side.
If you don't mind, could I go first, Chairman? Sure. Thanks. Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Miller, and I'm the Executive Director of Homeless Services United. HSU is a coalition representing over 55 mission-driven homeless service providers in New York City. We are grateful for this incredible attention to our members' payment issues, and thank you for the work of this committee and the speaker on this important matter. We appreciate the recent temporary cash flow our organizations have received with DHS's FY26 advances that you've been hearing about. Overall, our members say things are somewhat better. However, providers still have months of catch-up in pending budget actions, updates, and invoice approvals that are prohibiting them from being reimbursed for the services they have already performed. To illustrate this point, HSU sampled its DHS contracted members to assess the outstanding budget actions. 1/3 of our members have over $189 million in outstanding budget actions from FY20 to 25. So these are the past fiscal years that they've not been able to close out and therefore can't invoice against, they cannot get paid for. As we mentioned here today, we've heard some providers have stopped bidding on new DHS contracts because of the risk of doing further business with the city is simply too high. This comes at a time when the demand for shelter in New York City doubled in just 2 years, and vulnerability to homelessness is increasing due to federal cuts. The lack of normalcy when it comes to payments puts organizations at risk. It makes it difficult to pay staff, vendors, and runs. As we've been talking about, they've been forced to take out lines of credit and pay interest. The non-profits typically make requests to add money to their total contract amount due to new expenses they must incur throughout a contract year to operate their programs or shelters. Only after these requests move through multiple approvals from the city can they provide an invoice for payment. If I may, 1392, we support. Codifying a predictable and regular payment schedule is essential to protecting nonprofit shelter providers. By shifting to quarterly payment schedule on the contracts, DHS would help protect the financial health of our member organizations rather than weaken it. The devil will be in the details, so we are very looking forward to working with you and the administration on what the details are. I will just add one last thing, if I may, which is a response to the conversation that we had on the returnable grant funds that you guys were discussing earlier. Yes, they are available, but they are very, very challenging to access. It is a simple application, but must be completed for every outstanding invoice. So it's not as if you have $1 million contract and you want a loan for $250,000 for all the money you're owed. You have to go bit by bit in order to get it. So you're owed millions, you ask for millions, and you get maybe hundreds of thousands. So I just wanted to clarify that. And again, thank you. We look forward to continuing to work with you.
Good afternoon. I am Dan Lehman, President and CEO of Help USA. Thank you, Chair Wan and members of the Contract Committee for the opportunity to testify today. For 40 years, Help USA has provided transitional shelter and other services to fight homelessness and housing insecurity, including homelessness prevention, supportive housing, programs for survivors of domestic and intimate partner violence, and through its affiliate, Help Development Corporation, builds and operates permanent affordable housing. Help USA contracts with the City Departments of Homeless Services, Health and Mental Hygiene, Housing Preservation and Development, the City Human Resources Administration, and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, serving over 30,000 people each year across New York City and other jurisdictions. We appreciate the prompt advances received for our contracts with DHS for fiscal 26. However, we still have many contract budgets that are out of date with respect to key items like mandated salary adjustments, insurance, utilities, and other occupancy costs, and maintenance and repair, which prevents us from being fully reimbursed in a timely manner for costs incurred to provide the services we are contracted for. This places even large organizations like HELP under financial distress, impacting our ability to pay required staff wage adjustments and critical suppliers on a timely basis, even as we expand to meet ever-growing demand for contracted shelter services in New York City. We are forced to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on interest for working capital line of credit loans to bridge these cash flow delays, a cost that is not reimbursable under city contracts and drains our resources further. A quarterly payment schedule, as proposed under Intro 1392, on shelter contracts is essential to protecting the financial health of the nonprofit organizations the city depends on for mandated services. This change will establish a critical buffer for delays in reimbursement that regularly result in prolonged contract budget negotiations and modification actions. That said, the success of the proposed pilot program depends on the procedural details to be established by DHS, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, the Office of Management and Budget, and perhaps even the City Controller. Aspects such as a schedule for reconciling and recouping advances versus actual expenses, for truing up long-standing contracts for current day costs, for addressing the care days payment structure, for